This is a production of West Virginia Public Broadcasting.
Support for the Legislature Today is provided by West Virginia University, offering education, healthcare, and the opportunity to achieve career success since 1867. Information at wvu.edu.
Sonesta Suites in Charleston, an extended stay hotel located near the airport, downtown, and the state capitol. More at sonesta.com.
Solar Holler, supporting Appalachian communities and building on West Virginia's history of powering the nation by bringing solar energy and battery backup to homeowners, nonprofits, and businesses throughout the region. More at solarholler.com.
Welcome to the Legislature Today. I'm Brianna Heaney. The House of Delegates passed a bill that would hand over policy and rulemaking authority for state public schools to the legislature.
Currently, the State Board of Education is made up of 9 members, all of whom are appointed by the governor. If there isn't existing legislation on a rule or policy for public schools, then the State Board has the ability to step in and make those rules and policies with the help of the State Department of Education. In 2022, a constitutional amendment to give the legislature ultimate rulemaking power over schools, much like this bill, was on the ballot. Voters rejected the amendment. Delegate Mike Pushkin, a Democrat from Kanawha County, opposed the bill. He said it would go against the will of the people.
If you want to change the Constitution, the proper way to do it would be to pass a resolution to place it back on the ballot and let the voters decide again. Not for us to ignore the will of the voters, the clear will of the voters in 22 that rejected this question and say, we don't care what you think, we're gonna pass it anyway and try our hand at the Supreme Court.
Delegate Michael Hornby, a Republican from Berkeley County, is the lead sponsor of the bill. He argued that the ballot was skewed by politics of the time.
Would you agree that this question was on the ballot in 22?
This question was on the ballot, but there was political things happening with our previous governor that affected the passage of this bill. So my county overwhelmingly understood and voted for it.
What about the state of West Virginia? How'd they vote?
Well, they were affected by the politics of the day.
Could you not say that about every election? I mean,
a point of order was called, and the debate ended.
22nd, Doug Lynn was recognized to raise a point of order.
Pushkin said the law is also in violation of state Supreme Court precedent. Hornby agreed, but said the law could lead to a re-evaluation of that precedent if it were to go to a higher court.
I think the Supreme Court has gotten decisions wrong before, so I'd like to revisit this.
The bill passed 84-12. It now heads to the Senate for consideration.
A bill that would expand vaccine exemptions in the state is slated for second reading tomorrow in the House of Delegates. This is a period in which the bill can be amended or changed.
When introduced to the House floor, Senate Bill 460 looked a lot different from the bill that passed the Senate. The metamorphosis happened in the House Health Committee, chaired by Evan Worrell, a Republican from Cabell County. The biggest change is that the bill no longer has an exemption for quote-unquote religious or philosophical exemptions. It now is closer to current vaccine law, which is one of the strictest school vaccine policies in the U.S. Worrell says the bill expands medical exemptions.
We heard that's a big problem, and we're trying to solve problems this year. We heard the medical exemption process is very stringent, it's very hard to go through, so we've expanded that to match similar to what the Senate did.
The bill also narrowed legal repercussions for schools, including private schools, who refuse a medical exemption. In the Senate version, families could sue a school for civil penalties, whereas this bill would only allow for injunctive relief, Worrell explains.
Injunctive relief still allows the parents who file injunctive relief to the court to allow them to force them to accept the medical exemption, but the cost would be all on the family to do so.
Finally, the bill would require schools to report how many students they have with vaccine exemptions to the state health officer, another change made by the House. Lengthy debate on this bill is expected when delegates gavel in tomorrow morning.
Some West Virginia lawmakers say the cost of maintaining the state's sex offender registry should fall on the shoulders of the registrants themselves. Jack Walker brings us that report.
Convicted sex offenders in West Virginia are required to enlist in a registry maintained by the West Virginia State Police that details things like their name and address. House Bill 3164 would require people on that list to pay a fee of $250 annually to fund its upkeep. The bill was discussed today at a meeting of the West Virginia House of Delegates Judiciary Committee. There are roughly 6,400 individuals listed on the West Virginia State Police's digital registry. If each paid an annual fee of $250, the state would collect $1.6 million each year under current state law. The proposed bill would not add additional enforcement measures to the fee collection process, other than requiring notice of an individual's failure to pay be documented by their county clerk. The bill's lead sponsor is Delegate Bill Flanagan, a Republican from Ohio County. Flanagan says his bill would shift the cost of maintaining the registry away from taxpayers and better support state police.
I mean, I would look at it the same as if you're on parole. That's not how I look at it. You're going to have to do this the rest of your life if you committed a crime. And the taxpayers are the ones bearing costs. So.
During the hearing, West Virginia Troopers Association President Jeff Chumley said maintaining the registry takes resources and imposes a mental burden on officers. That's why he supports the bill's passage.
So being short-staffed, answering 911 calls, accidents, domestics, burglaries, everything else, this is an added thing that we got to do to fill.
But critics of the bill worry it could be overly punitive to people who have already faced consequences for their convictions, especially those convicted of non-felony offenses. That included Delegate Rick Hillenbrand, a Republican from Hampshire County.
So that leads to my other question. Are there constitutional issues and things like, this sounds like a continuing spanking?
Delegate Bill Ridenauer, a Republican from Jefferson County, questioned the feasibility of the bill. He said people with criminal convictions already have a hard time finding work and reintegrating into society, which could make it hard to scrape together an extra $250 each year.
I'm just a little concerned, like I said, that we're continuing to go after folks. Because, $250 is not a lot to most of us here. To somebody who's on the street, because of what they did in the past, that this may be an overwhelming thing for them every year to have to pay something like this, together with everything else that they've got.
Flanagan said he would be open to revisiting the bill to address lawmaker concerns and make implementing a fee more practical, including adjusting the total annual cost. The House Judiciary Committee advanced House Bill 3164 to the markup and discussion phase. For the Legislature Today, I'm Jack Walker at the state capitol.
Appalachian Power electricity customers protested a proposed rate increase on the Capitol steps on Thursday. Groups have urged the legislature to do something about the rising cost of electricity in West Virginia. If approved by the West Virginia Public Service Commission, the proposal would raise the average customer's bill by $23.74 a month. Bills have been introduced to freeze rates and suspend disconnections, but they've not advanced out of committee. Appalachian Power also seeks to lower the credit customers receive from their solar panels on their rooftop. Gary Zuckett is the co-director of the West Virginia Citizen Action Group.
The new energy economy that is sort of passing us by as a state is a job creator. I mean, there's a lot of jobs in solar and wind. The IBEW is training their interns specifically for, developing solar and, hooking those types of systems up. So we really, I think we're missing an opportunity for some economic expansion in West Virginia. And, and also considering that we have big companies coming in who want their energy mix to include renewables. So, and we can't ignore that because they won't locate here unless they have that availability.
Citizen Action Group and others have submitted testimony to the PSC opposing Appalachian Power's rate proposal. The PSC will consider the case this summer. A number of bills have moved through the legislature this year that make changes to the practice of medicine in the state. Bills allowing optometrists and pharmacies to expand their practice are still moving. Senator Eric Tarr, a Republican from Putnam County, has argued against some of these bills. Earlier, he joined Eric Douglas to discuss why.
Welcome to the Legislature Today. I'm here with Senator Eric Tarr, Republican out of Putnam County. Thank you for coming today.
Thanks for having me on, Eric.
I'm looking forward to this conversation, actually. I know you're a busy man, so let's jump right into it. There have been a number of bills floating around the legislature this session about health and changing the scope of practice for doctors, at least with the idea of giving more people access to care. But our broader question, we're 49th, 50th in just about everything, unfortunately, but definitely in health outcomes and that sort of thing. So what can we do? What can the legislature do to help make West Virginians healthier?
It's economic development. It's really what it comes down to is you have to have enough of a taxpayer base that affords the services of health care for those that can't afford it. And so we have about 500,000 people just on Medicaid alone in this state, out of a state of 1.77 million people. So, and then if you even come out of there, you have still a lot of retirees in the workforce, or not out of the workforce rather. So you don't have a very strong or a very large working population in West Virginia to afford the health care services that might be provided by the government, which tends to be some of the more expensive because of the more unhealthy people, right? So you got people that are either in the later stages of life, or you got people that being on Medicaid is just an unhealthier population in general than you have your working age people that are otherwise employed. So that's part of it. The other part is that in order to be able to afford the access to health care, you have to have people that bring in the number of people and the number of jobs that bring in the healthcare infrastructure. So if you don't have a population, you can't attract the investments. So and we say this all the time, jobs fix a lot of problems in West Virginia. And that's really what has to happen. I think it takes a long-term view and it takes long-term discipline to get there.
I know one of the bills that you were involved with was the very rural hospitals. I believe that came through one of the committees just in the last day or two. But we've got some hospitals that people are 40 or 50 miles away from the closest medical center. How do we deal with that in the Kanawha Valley, Morgantown, those areas? It's not as big a challenge, clearly, but
when you look at access to health care and proximity to health care centers, those are usually going to be in your population centers. So, if we don't have a lot of cities, we don't have a lot of big cities in West Virginia. And if you're going to locate a hospital, you're going to usually be near a population base. And so the people that, in a lot of the very rural areas of the state, they chose to be there, right?
True
it's not like there wasn't a hospital. There was a hospital there when they went there and now it's gone. Because most of the hospitals we have in the state, maybe there's been one or two closed, but by and large, we've opened more than we've closed down. So if those areas where you have these healthcare deserts, there's not new healthcare deserts. So people are making those choices to be away from those population centers where that's
there's
at.
a couple. Well, like for neonatal care, or for pregnancy care, or for OB care, but no, I think in general, I'm sure you're right that it's so. Kind of the topic of the day, though. There have been bills that I believe you've opposed both of them, but to broaden the scope of optometry and broaden the scope of pharmacists and allow them to prescribe different or kind of the easier on-demand medicines. But so let's talk about optometry first.
Sure.
What's that bill all about?
So that bill allows laser surgery on your eye without actually having ever done laser surgery on an actual human. Whereas in order to be able to do that, if you're in medicine, you have thousands of hours and supervised surgery where you've actually done that on a human being before you're ever out on your own doing it on a human being. And the way that bill was lobbied is they actually had people out here lined up in the Capitol giving them ping pong balls and saying, here, you can do this surgery, to try to oversimplify it. And the thing is that a lot of this is done in the name of access to health care. And I brought this up, so there's several counties, you're not going to find an orthopedic surgeon in those counties. So are you going to let your family practice doctor do your total knee replacement just because there's not a surgeon in that town? So I think we have to be really, really careful when we're getting to scope of practice issues, and politics are what drive your scope of practice rather than what the education was. And that's what happens, is that I've lectured for physical therapists across the country on advocacy. And I'll say a lot of times, you get your license through your education. What you can do with it happens through legislation.
Okay.
And the problem with legislation is by and large politically driven. It's who has the political power to get the bill across the way. And when that happens, facts tend to be dismissed when there's a group that has the power.
Sure.
And so that's the struggle around any kind of scope of practice issue when you're looking at it. And my beef with this has been is that when you have two professions that are hammering out that what their scope of practice should be, and they have disagreements, those groups need to come to an agreement before we run it across up here, because once you bring in the legislation side of it without having the facts to drive it, you're putting people in harm's way, and that's my concern.
I don't remember if that was that bill specifically, but there have been some bills along these lines where no medical professionals were consulted at all, and I don't know how that happens without again, it's the political power more so than the
Yeah, and I've been involved with scope of practice battles, for years, because well before I was ever a legislator, I was involved heavily in the Physical Therapy Association. Held a bunch of different positions all the way from legislative liaison to president. And in that respect, I advocated for the provisions of physical therapy. What can you do with your education, and how far should you be able to take it in practice in our state? Throughout that, being on the other side of it, advocating for, okay, we're trained to do this, so we should be allowed to do it type thing. Typically what you should happen, given my experience in successes and failures along the way, and then also be on the legislative side of it, is stakeholders should be at a table together with a mediator, going through and explaining why they think they should be able to do more with the education they have in our state legally. And then the profession is saying, no, you shouldn't, and this is why, and this is what you don't know, because a lot of times when you're trying to get the scope of practice expanded, you don't know what you don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure.
And you need to have those two groups sitting down and people hearing it out and trying to find out where the common stuff is. When you can find the common things, you can actually get scope of practice expansion. The PERD, which is the Performance and Evaluation Research Division for the state, that's the tool we use to go into as a legislative body to get facts.
Mm-hmm.
And it hasn't been used to the extent that it should be, I believe, in these situations, so that we're dealing with facts instead of political powers that may be.
Moving on to the pharmacist side, again, that was pitched as if you're 20 miles away from your doctor, it's the weekend, you can't, that you go to a local pharmacist and they can give you whatever. I recall you were not in favor of that bill and that change. And if I recall, Senator Takubo, who is a physician, and a couple others were opposed to that for the same reason. So,
physicians and pharmacists alike came to me about that bill after it went through two committees asking, what does this bill do? And the fact that you had licensed professionals on both sides of it not understanding what it was supposed to do is what brought my attention to it. So I started looking at why is it confusing, because I hadn't seen the bill. I'm not on Health Committee, I'm not on Gov Org Committee. So it went through both those committees, and now it's coming into second reading, and I'm being asked to look at it. So it was the first time it came into my view. So when I started looking at it, they were right. It essentially said that you could prescribe a medicine if you had a new diagnosis by a test that indicated that new diagnosis, but you couldn't prescribe the medicine if it was a new diagnosis. So it had this negative loop in there, and that's what made it confusing. And so I started looking at it for that reason. And as I started looking at it for that reason, I thought, well, there's a whole lot of other issues here. Let's talk to the Board of Pharmacy. Let's talk to the Board of Medicine. And as we started talking to them, both sides had issues with it, and neither side felt they'd been heard. So that's when I really started going out at it, is saying, okay, we need to have a stakeholders meeting. These people need to be in a room together talking this out, and we need to hear that conversation.
Where does a bill like that come from if neither of the groups are lobbying for it?
Model legislation. What happens is with professional groups, you'll have, usually it's an association for that profession, develops what's called model legislation. Model legislation is drafted up to that look like legislation, but it's irrespective of any given state's code. And so you'll have states that go in based on this think tank, essentially, as legislation, and try to craft that to their code. And then once it gets adopted by a few states in some form or fashion, then you'll get these other states saying, well, Montana did it, Colorado did it, California did it. But until you actually get to looking at what they did, you really, just because they used the model legislation to get to an end, doesn't mean those two states passed the same legislation. And that's where the rub comes, and that's where the problem was with this one. They were basing it off of another state's passage of model legislation, but didn't use the same verbiage they did, and you ended up in this negative loop. And I believe if you had a stakeholders meeting, it would have been caught well ahead of the time it got to me.
I remember in the floor discussion on this as well, there was some discussion of whether some stakeholders had a chance to come in and testify in committee. Do you anything more you want to say on that?
Yeah, that's what on the floor debate I was challenging the senator from Jefferson County in there, that whether or not people who had asked to testify to it, who had expertise in it, were denied the ability to testify in that committee. I do believe that they were denied that ability to testify, both from before. Actually, the information came to me as I was on the floor, because in that debate, I got a text message saying, "Wait a minute, this isn't right." And so I asked a lot of questions to get to that answer. And then afterwards, I had those people meet me out afterwards saying, "Look, you were spot on. This is what happened." And so I challenged that, and we actually had a stakeholder meeting yesterday where we had every Board of Medicine, we had the Board of Pharmacy, we had the Pharmacy Association, we had the Medical Association, we had the School of Pharmacy from Marshall University, we had the senators on either side of it, we had counsel from either side on it, and we sat down there and went through the bill. And which is what should have happened before it ever actually got to the extent that it happened at the time it did.
Where does that bill stand now? It passed the Senate, right?
It has, where it stands now, it was pulled into Rules Committee. So after second reading, we went through second reading, the amendment that was offered, that I and Senator Kubo and Senator Weld offered, was not adopted. It failed 17-14. And then the bill was referred to Rules Committee. It's still sitting in Rules Committee, but we've since had a stakeholder meeting to go in and suggest changes.
Okay.
So it'll go into Rules Committee. It may or may not be amended there. It may or may not come out of Rules Committee. So that's yet to be seen.
Rules tends to be a place to park things while you're thinking about it. Just a little.
Yeah, it's what we use for two different things. One is that when a bill gets all the way to the floor and we're just not real sure that the product that got to the floor is the product that should be passed from the Senate, sometimes they'll go into Rules Committee. Sometimes we just use that for calendar management. Is you'll go in and you know that you've got 10 tough bills and you don't want to have to deal with all those on the floor at the same time. You can parse them out by putting them in Rules Committee.
Sure. Unfortunately, we're out of time. I had several more things I wanted to talk to you about, but we're out of time for the day. Okay. Appreciate you coming down. Is there any last comment you want to make?
Thanks for having me on. We're over halfway through here today, so it gets to be a pressure cooker, and this is the time it gets busy. So thanks for having me on.
Well, I hope you'll be willing to come back again. I know you've been on before, but
certainly.
I hope you'll be willing to come back again. Thank you.
That was Senator Eric Tarr speaking with Eric Douglas about bills making their way through the legislature that attempt to change the practice of medicine in the state. That's it for tonight. Thank you for joining us. Catch the legislature today, Monday through Friday at 6 p.m. And remember, West Virginia Public Broadcasting covers the session daily in our radio news program, West Virginia Morning, and on our news site at wvpublic.org. We also broadcast the daily floor sessions of both the House and the Senate on the West Virginia channel. I'm Brianna Heaney. Good evening, and see you here again tomorrow.
Support for the Legislature Today is provided by West Virginia University, offering education, healthcare, and the opportunity to achieve career success since 1867. Information at wvu.edu.
Sonesta Suites in Charleston, an extended stay hotel located near the airport, downtown, and the state capitol. More at sonesta.com.
Solar Hauler, supporting Appalachian communities and building on West Virginia's history of powering the nation by bringing solar energy and battery backup to homeowners, nonprofits, and businesses throughout the region. More